At 2:13 in the morning, my 1-year-old daughter screamed from her crib, and exactly 1 minute of our security footage vanished. That was the moment I stopped telling myself the sound in the backyard was probably a raccoon. My name is Melissa Carter. I was 44, a logistics officer at Fort Liberty, living with my husband Daniel and our daughter Emma in a modest 3-bedroom brick house in West Fayetteville, North Carolina. There was nothing remarkable about it. We had beige carpet, a backstep that creaked whenever anyone put weight on it, and a mailbox that leaned slightly to the left no matter how many times I straightened it. Daniel was supposedly in Atlanta for a regional sales meeting, so I was alone with Emma. The noise came first. A faint scrape near the fence, followed by 2 slow, careful steps across the patio. I sat upright in bed and listened. Before I could reach for the lamp, Emma began to cry. It was not a sleepy whimper or the fussing she made when she lost her pacifier. She was screaming so hard that she coughed between breaths. I pulled on a pair of sweatpants, took my pistol from the lockbox, and moved into the hallway. "Mommy's coming," I whispered. I checked Emma's room first. She was standing in her crib, red-faced and terrified, both hands wrapped around the rail. Her window was closed, her closet was empty. I lifted her against my shoulder, felt her fingers clutch my t-shirt, and cleared the house. I checked the kitchen, laundry room, guest bedroom, garage, every door and every window. Everything was locked. Everything was latched. Outside, the yard looked empty, beneath the yellow porch light. With Emma still on my hip, I opened the security app on my phone. 4 cameras covered the front porch driveway, back patio, and nursery hallway. All 4 showed as online. I scrolled backward through the recordings. At 2:12, the patio was empty. At 2:13, the screen dissolved into gray static. At 2:14, the yard was empty again. I replayed the section 3 times. Every time I got the same result. Exactly 60 seconds of electronic snow and a low hiss. Emma had stopped crying, but she would not release her grip on me. "Okay," I said quietly. "That is not normal." I stayed awake until sunrise, with every light in the house on, and a dining chair wedged beneath the back doorknob. At 7:30, I called work and said I would be late. I packed Emma's diaper bag, removed the security DVR from the hall cabinet, and drove to Sandhill Security Solutions near Skibo Road. The technician was a thin man named Leon, who wore silver-framed glasses and drank coffee from a mug that read, "World's Okayest Dad." He worked on the damaged file for almost an hour. Eventually, an image emerged. The dark, grainy clip showed the nursery door opening a few inches. Then a shoulder moved into the frame. The person entered and paused beside Emma's crib long enough to make her Moon and Stars mobile begin to turn. Leon leaned closer to the monitor. His hand stopped on the mouse, and the color drained from his face. "Ma'am," he said, barely above a whisper. "Take your daughter and leave right now." I stepped beside him and stared at the screen. Someone had been standing inside Emma's bedroom, and whoever it was had entered my locked house without forcing a door or breaking a window. I barely remembered leaving the security shop. One moment I was staring at Leon's monitor. The next I was outside, fumbling twice with Emma's car seat buckle, because my hands would not stop shaking. The footage did not show a face, but that did not matter. Someone had been in my daughter's room. Someone had walked into my home with a key. I pulled into a Food Lion parking lot and called 911. About 20 minutes later, 2 deputies from the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office met me at the house. Deputy Harris, calm and in his late 50s, watched it twice with his younger partner. He admitted it was disturbing, but he also said the file had been damaged and no one could be identified with certainty. I asked if I was supposed to wait while a stranger stood over my baby's crib. He promised a report, extra patrols and technicians to dust the doors and windows. I told him they would not find anything because the intruder had a key. He did not argue. Before leaving, he advised me to change every lock and inspect the smoke detectors for hidden cameras. I appreciated that advice more than I appreciated the report. By noon, I was sitting in a locksmith's office. By 3 o'clock, every exterior lock had been replaced. Even then, I could not make myself spend another night in that house. I packed clothes for us and drove an hour north to my older sister Rachel's house in Raleigh. Rachel hugged me before I reached the porch. She told me I looked exhausted. I told her I had not slept. She said I did not have to explain anything and brought us inside. That evening, after Emma slept in a borrowed portable crib, I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. I told him someone had been inside the house. There was a silence before he asked whether I was okay. I said I was physically fine and explained everything: the noise, Emma's scream, the missing minute, and the recovered image. When I finished, he asked whether I had actually seen anyone. I said the video showed a person, but not a face. He paused again and suggested it might only be corrupted footage. I reminded him a technician had recovered it. He told me not to jump to conclusions. What bothered me was not only what Daniel said, but what he did not say. He never asked if Emma was frightened or whether the intruder had touched her. Instead, he wanted to know exactly what I had seen. After the call ended, I could not stop thinking about that. The next morning, while Rachel made pancakes for Emma, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. At the top, I wrote, "Who has a key?" I listed myself, Daniel, Daniel's mother, Linda, and Rick Lawson. Rick was a retired contractor and one of Daniel's oldest family friends. He had helped remodel Emma's nursery before she was born and had worked inside our house for nearly 3 weeks. I had given him a spare key while I was on base. I could not remember whether he had ever returned it. That afternoon, while Rachel and I folded laundry, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the front porch camera. I opened the app. No one was visible, but Emma's stuffed white rabbit had been placed neatly in the center of the welcome mat. I knew I had packed it before leaving. Someone wanted me to know they had returned. I called the sheriff's office immediately. A deputy photographed the rabbit and bagged it for fingerprints. Nothing useful came back. Emma's fingerprints covered it, as did mine. A few partial prints could not be identified. Whoever had placed it there had either worn gloves or handled it carefully. One question haunted me. The intruder had taken no jewelry, no electronics, and no cash. They had not opened a drawer. They had entered my daughter's room, stood beside her crib, and left. 2 days later, I drove back to Fayetteville while Rachel stayed with Emma. For the first time in my Army career, I did not want to clear a building. My home felt foreign. I sat in the driveway for several minutes. The mailbox still leaned to the left. Mrs. Reynolds next door was watering her flowers. Nothing looked different, yet everything felt wrong. When she saw me, she hurried over and said the entire street had heard what happened. Then she mentioned an older white Ford pickup seen on 3 nights after midnight. It parked near the empty lot instead of directly in front of our house. She had never seen the driver or the license plate, but whoever drove it kept the headlights off. Across the street lived Harold Jenkins, a 73-year-old Vietnam veteran who spent much of each day on his porch with black coffee. He said I looked tired and pointed to the empty rocker beside him. I told him the whole story. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said he had heard Emma that night, a little after 2. He had also heard a truck door close. He could not identify the color, but he remembered the engine. It had not started near my house. It sounded as though someone had allowed the truck to roll downhill first and only then turned the ignition. I knew exactly why anyone would do that to avoid waking the neighborhood. That was not chance. It was planning. I knocked on 2 more doors. One neighbor had a Ring camera facing the street. We reviewed nearly an hour. At 2:07 a.m., a blurry white pickup rolled slowly past my house with its headlights off. At 2:18, it drove away. The plate was unreadable, but it looked like Rick's older white Ford F-150. My stomach tightened. I called him that evening. He answered cheerfully and asked about Emma. He said he had heard about the break-in. I told him it had not exactly been a break-in, and then I asked whether he had been anywhere near my house Monday night. He said no. When I asked what he had been doing, he claimed he had been fishing alone at Jordan Lake. His answer came too quickly. I drove there anyway. Rick was outside cleaning fishing rods. He smiled and asked if I truly thought he would sneak into my home. I told him I no longer knew what to believe. He laughed, saying I had spent too long in the Army and was treating this like an overseas operation. I froze. I had never told Rick that I had cleared the house room by room. The deputies had arrived afterward. Rachel had no reason to mention it. Yet somehow, Rick seemed to know exactly how I had responded. His words followed me home. Maybe he had guessed. The harder I tried to accept that explanation, the less convincing it became. The next morning, I requested a personal day from Fort Liberty. Colonel Hayes had known me for years. He told me I did not sound like myself and offered another day if I needed it. Instead of returning to Leon, I drove nearly 2 hours to Charlotte. A detective friend from the base had recommended a digital forensics laboratory called Carolina Evidence Recovery. They restored damaged surveillance for police and insurers. The technician, Ben Alvarez, was in his early 50s and spoke with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to difficult evidence. He read Leon's notes and connected my DVR to equipment that looked borrowed from NASA. Hard drives spun, while progress bars crawled across 3 monitors. Nearly 3 hours later, he told me he had recovered only 8 additional seconds. He played the clip. The timestamp read 2:13:17 a.m. The nursery door opened slowly, not kicked or forced, but opened with the calm familiarity of someone who believed they belonged there. A figure wearing a dark baseball cap stepped inside and walked directly to Emma's crib. The figure leaned over her. Emma stirred in her sleep. The intruder did not pick her up or harm her. A hand gently brushed her hair, almost affectionately, before the figure stood, watching her sleep. The clip ended. Ben and I sat in silence. Then he rewound it and told me to watch the feet. For barely a second, the camera had captured a clear angle of brown leather work boots, with heavy soles, and a worn company logo stitched on the side. Ben enlarged the frame. The image blurred, but the blue oval still read Lawson Construction. I knew those boots. Rick had worn them daily while remodeling Emma's nursery. I had once teased him for refusing to throw them away, and he had called them his lucky boots. Ben asked whether I knew anyone who owned a pair like that. I told him I knew exactly one person. I copied the restored footage onto a flash drive and drove straight to Rick's house. All the way, I replayed the unhurried entrance, direct path, and gentle touch. Nothing about the intruder seemed rushed. It looked practiced. When I reached Rick's gravel driveway, the garage door was open. The porch light was on in the middle of the afternoon, and his pickup was gone. No one answered the door. As I turned away, his neighbor, Mrs. Collins, came out with groceries. She said Rick had left early that morning after loading boxes into his truck. She did not know where, but he had seemed nervous. I drove directly to the sheriff's office. This time, I was not asking them to believe my instincts. I was carrying evidence. Detective Sarah Collins met me in a small interview room. She was practical, direct, and about my age. She watched twice and froze the frame on the logo. When I named Rick Lawson, she said they would bring him in. For the first time in days, I felt a small measure of relief. I thought the nightmare might finally be ending. It was not. 2 days later, Detective Collins called and asked me to come in. Her voice warned me. In a conference room, she spread photographs, timestamps, gas station footage, and credit card receipts across the table. Rick had purchased coffee in Sanford at 1:58 that morning and was still visible there at 2:19. Sanford was nearly 40 miles from my house. Even at a reckless speed, he could not have been beside Emma's crib at 2:13. 3 cameras and his bank records confirmed it. The boots were real, but anyone could obtain or borrow a pair. I felt the certainty drain out of me. For almost 48 hours, I had believed Rick was the intruder. Now I had accused a man who appeared to have an airtight alibi. Rick called that evening. He knew police had visited. He sounded disappointed, not angry. I apologized. He told me someone had used his company boots to frighten me. Then he said something that changed the direction of the case. Whoever did this knew my house, and they wanted me looking at Rick. I had focused on the clue, not why it was left for a camera to catch. Someone had deliberately created a believable suspect. Someone understood how an investigation would unfold. The next morning, Daniel called from Atlanta. He said he had been thinking about the house and believed Emma and I should never return. I said I was not returning yet. He meant permanently and wanted to sell immediately. I reminded him that we still did not know what was happening. He became impatient. and insisted I would never feel safe there again, so we needed to list it immediately. The urgency bothered me. Daniel normally hated rushed decisions. He had spent 3 weeks comparing lawnmowers before buying one. Now, within days of the incident, he wanted to sell our home. Something did not fit. That afternoon, I returned only for Emma's things. The rooms felt cold and empty. I packed diapers, winter clothes, and a box of family albums from the hallway closet. As I reached for the last album, I heard a faint clicking sound. Tick, tick, tick. It was quiet enough that most people might have ignored it, but military training had taught me to notice small irregularities. I followed the sound into the nursery. It seemed to come from the air vent above the changing table. I removed the vent cover with a screwdriver and found a black device taped inside. It was about the size of a deck of cards with a green light blinking and a tiny memory card in the side. Someone had not merely entered our home. Someone had been watching us from inside it. I placed the device in an evidence bag from my glove compartment and called Detective Collins. She told me not to touch anything else. Within 40 minutes, detectives and technicians filled the house. This time, they were not only dusting doorknobs. They removed vent covers, opened smoke detectors, examined outlets, and photographed every inch of Emma's room. They found only one camera. Detective Collins examined it and said it was not a cheap consumer device. It had been professionally installed. My thoughts immediately returned to Rick and the nursery renovation, but she warned me not to jump to conclusions. 3 days later, the serial number led them to the installer. At her office, she placed a personnel file in front of me. The name was Kevin Moore. I had never heard the name. He had once worked for Rick Lawson as an electrician and had helped with the nursery renovation. A photo showed a heavy-set, brown-haired man in his early 40s beside a ladder in Emma's future room. I did not remember him because I had been deployed for 2 weeks during part of the work, leaving Rick to supervise. Rick fired Kevin 9 months later for stealing tools. Kevin also had 2 prior burglary convictions. What made them unusual was that he had stolen nothing in either case. He entered occupied homes and lingered. He watched television or sat in kitchens, leaving before anyone woke. Psychologists believed offenders like him were driven by control and by the thrill of entering another person's private life. The details formed a horrifying pattern. The copied key, the direct path to Emma's room, the hand across her hair, and the hidden camera. During the renovation, Kevin had unrestricted access and could have copied the key. Detectives searched his last known address, but he was gone. Collins had also recovered camera data. The memory card had automatically overwritten most older files, but several short clips remained. Some showed me leaving for work. Some showed me carrying Emma. One showed Daniel mowing the lawn. One was recorded 2 weeks before the missing minute. It showed me putting Emma down for an afternoon nap and leaving the room. 30 seconds later, the door opened. Kevin entered, stood over the crib, smiled, and then looked directly into the hidden camera, as though he were proud of what he had done. Until that moment, fear had been the strongest emotion I felt. Then fear gave way to fury. Kevin had chosen the wrong family and the wrong mother. But the army had taught me that rage was dangerous. Anger could sharpen focus briefly, but if I allowed it to control me, it would destroy the judgment we needed to catch him. Collins made the rules clear. I was not to search for him, confront him, or act alone. If he contacted me, I was to call her first. I agreed. The investigation expanded. The sheriff's office joined Fayetteville Police and the State Bureau of Investigation. Kevin's license records, finances, and phone activity suggested that he had not left the area. He was hiding nearby. More disturbing, detectives discovered evidence that my family was not his only target. Hidden cameras had been installed in 3 other county homes during remodels over 6 years. None of the families knew they had been watched. Kevin had constructed a private world inside other people's lives. The more I learned, the more guilt mixed with anger. One afternoon, Rachel found me standing in Emma's empty nursery holding a baseball bat. I did not remember picking it up. She asked if I was all right. I admitted I was not. She took the bat from me. I told her I had failed to protect Emma. Rachel immediately said I had not failed. Kevin had entered the room, but I had forced him into the open. I said I should have found the camera. She said I could not have known. I sat on the edge of the crib, exhausted, and told her that I had spent 20 years planning military convoys through combat zones. She squeezed my shoulder and said none of that could prepare me for being a mother. That truth broke through every defense. I cried harder than I had since Emma was born, not because I was weak, but because I finally admitted I could not solve this alone. 2 days later, Colin said they were ready with a trap. That evening, I sat with detectives, patrol officers, and an FBI behavioral analyst who had joined the investigation after similar incidents were reported in neighboring states. Colin spread house photos across the table. Kevin studied routines. He waited until homeowners appeared comfortable again. We would make him believe I had returned to normal. Rachel and Emma would appear to move back into the house with me. Neighbors would see boxes and lights each evening. Then Rachel and Emma would quietly leave before dark. A realistic infant training doll would be placed in Emma's crib beneath a blanket. Thermal cameras would cover each entrance deputies would watch from neighboring homes, and detectives would wait in an unmarked van 2 streets away. Everyone disagreed about my role. I insisted on remaining inside. Detective Collins immediately refused, saying they would not risk me. I argued Kevin would sense a change, and I knew the house best. The FBI analyst agreed that Kevin would expect to see me. Collins finally allowed it under one condition. I had to follow every instruction and never confront him. I promised. On Friday evening, Rachel helped me carry boxes inside while neighbors watched from across the street. By sunset, it looked like Emma and I were home. At 11:30, detectives escorted Rachel and Emma out the back. I kissed my daughter goodnight, watched the taillights disappear, and locked the door. For the first time in my life, I hoped someone would break into my house. At 1:47 a.m., I sat in darkness, wearing jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and my army boots. My pistol remained holstered. The only light came from the baby monitor beside me. An earpiece rested in my left ear, and every few minutes, Detective Collins reported that the north side backyard and motion sensors were clear. Deputies watched from 3 homes. A tactical team waited 2 blocks away. My heart would not slow. At 2:11, my phone vibrated. One word appeared. Movement. Someone was near the fence. I looked toward the kitchen window and saw nothing. Then I heard a faint metallic click from the back door. It was not forced. It unlocked exactly as it had before. Someone slipped inside. Slow footsteps crossed the kitchen floor. They were calm, not hesitant. The intruder knew the house. The hallway camera caught a dark hoodie and baseball cap. Even at a distance, I recognized the heavy work boots. Detective Collins whispered one name into my earpiece. Kevin. Then she ordered me to hold my position. Kevin passed the guest room and bathroom. He went straight to the nursery and approached the crib. Beneath a pink blanket, the training doll looked like a sleeping toddler. Kevin smiled with an almost gentle grandfatherly expression. He leaned down. There you are, he whispered. He brushed its hair. You're safe now. My stomach turned. Then he added, Mommy's gone. In that moment, I understood something even more disturbing than the surveillance. Kevin believed he was rescuing children. Detective Collins gave the signal. The nursery erupted. The closet door flew open and 2 detectives tackled Kevin before he could react. At the same time, the bedroom window shattered inward as another tactical officer came through. Kevin hit the floor and struggled only briefly. He shouted, You're scaring the baby! Collins yelled, There is no baby! The blanket slipped, exposing plastic blue eyes. Kevin stopped fighting and stared at it in confusion. Then he looked toward me and said he had been helping her. I stepped into the doorway. No, you were terrifying her. His expression suggested he truly did not understand the difference. Blue lights flooded the street. Neighbors watched in robes and pajamas as deputies led Kevin away. Before they put him in the patrol car, he twisted toward me and shouted that I did not know what kind of mother I was. I met his eyes and told him I knew exactly what kind. The car door slammed. For the first time in weeks, I believed Emma and I might truly be safe. Kevin's arrest reached the local news before sunrise. By breakfast, reporters and satellite trucks lined our subdivision. I hated the attention, but Detective Collins said someone might recognize him. She was right. Within 48 hours, the sheriff's office received more than 30 calls. Some came from people who had hired Lawson Construction. Others came from families who had lived for years with strange incidents they could never explain. A rocking chair moved overnight, a nursery door left open, a security camera that briefly lost its signal. An elderly Hope Mills couple thought they were becoming forgetful. Kevin had entered their home twice. Search warrants uncovered boxes of concealed cameras, copied house keys, notebooks filled with addresses, and photographs of homes across 3 North Carolina counties. They linked him to at least 9 entries, possibly more. Collins invited me to observe an interview. I hesitated, but she said I deserved to hear something. Kevin sat behind a metal table in an orange jail uniform. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not monstrous, simply ordinary, which somehow made him more frightening. Detectives placed photographs of families' children and front doors before him, then asked, "Why Emma?" He said he liked our quiet house. When Collins pointed out that he had installed a camera and entered while we slept, he insisted no one had known and no one had been hurt. I could not stay silent. I said he had stood over my sleeping daughter. He answered that he had been making sure she was safe. I said she was safe until he entered. For the first time, his expression changed not to guilt, but irritation. He said a soldier leaves home and cannot protect a child every minute. Detective Collins immediately ended the interview. She did not need anything more. Kevin had just admitted exactly what prosecutors needed. Months later, the trial began in Cumberland County Superior Court. Families from the other cases filled the courtroom. An elderly widow cried, describing old muddy boot prints in her hallway. Another father admitted he had spent years believing his teenage son was sneaking out at night. Neither family had known Kevin was the one entering their homes. I testified in a simple navy dress, not my Army uniform. The case was not about my military service. It was about my daughter. The prosecutor asked me to describe the night Emma screamed at 2:13 a.m. Then he played the video. The courtroom went silent. Even Kevin looked away. After 4 days of testimony and less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty on every count. As deputies led him from the courtroom, he looked back at me. I felt relief, not anger. Reporters waited on the courthouse steps. I spoke for only a minute. I urged anyone renovating a home to change the locks, inspect every room, and trust their instincts. Mine may have saved my daughter's life. Leon stood off to one side. After the cameras packed up, he came over and shook my hand. He said many people would have talked themselves out of what I saw. I told him he had believed me when I needed someone to. He nodded and said sometimes that was all it took. People ask if we moved. We did not. For a while I considered it. Every room held a memory of what happened. Every floor creak stopped me. Every time wind moved through the trees behind the fence, I looked toward the backyard. Leaving from fear would let Kevin keep controlling me. I was finished giving him that power. After the investigation ended and the sheriff's office released the house, I changed every lock again and upgraded every camera. The old DVR went into the attic. I could not discard it or bear to see it. The biggest transformation was Emma's room. I repainted the pale yellow walls a soft sage green. Rachel helped hang new curtains. Daniel built a bookshelf beneath the window. We replaced the old rocking chair with one my father had made years before. Slowly, the crime scene became a child's room again. Daniel and I had difficult conversations after he returned from Atlanta. We spent several evenings on the back porch after Emma was asleep. One night, he apologized. He admitted he had searched for logic because explaining it away made it feel unreal. I understood because part of me had wanted the same thing. He said he should have trusted me sooner. I took his hand and told him we had both learned something. He promised that the next time I said my instincts were screaming, he would listen. Then he hoped there would be no next time. A few weeks later, Detective Collins visited with coffee and donuts. It was not official. She watched Emma toddle across the living room, carrying the same stuffed white rabbit which the sheriff's office had finally released. It was almost her size. She hugged it and laughed. Collins smiled, and said she liked this ending better. So did I. Before leaving, she handed me Leon's handwritten note. He thanked me for trusting my instincts and speaking up. Because I had, other families finally received answers, and I may have saved people I would never meet. I placed it inside my grandmother's family Bible. It is still there. Emma is older now. She remembers none of it, not the night the investigation or the courtroom. To her, our backyard is simply where butterflies land on flowers each spring. Sometimes I wake and check the clock. When it reads 2:13, I no longer panic. I listen. Most nights I hear crickets, a distant freight train, or wind moving through the pine trees. They are ordinary, peaceful sounds, the kind I once took for granted. Looking back, I learned that revenge does not always mean making someone suffer. Sometimes it means refusing to let the worst moment define your life. Kevin wanted control. Instead, he lost his freedom, and my daughter kept hers. If this story reminds you to trust your instincts when something feels wrong, then sharing it has been worthwhile. And if you have ever faced a moment that changed your life forever, I hope you remember that you are stronger than you think. Thank you for spending this time with me, and take good care of the people you love. The end.